He weighed just 120 pounds, not a tank commander, not a hardened assault trooper, not even an artillery officer, just an intelligence lieutenant. And on a frozen morning in January 1945, 6 German Tiger tanks were coming straight toward his line. By the end of that day, he would call artillery fire onto his own position, that and live. January 24th, 7 o'clock, hours, near the village of Hausen, France. The cold that morning was not something you merely felt on your skin. It seeped deeper than that, into muscle, into bone. Into thought, the temperature hovered far below freezing. Snow coated the forest in a thick white silence that absorbed light and flattened sound. Breath crystallized in the air. Boots cracked through frozen crust with every step. Inside a small command post dug into the earth, American officers leaned over maps that had already been smudged by mud and frost. Radios hissed. Telephone wires trembled. Coffee had gone cold long before anyone had the chance to drink it. Outside, artillery shells were tearing the tree line apart. German guns were methodical, measured, patient. Each impact split frozen timber into splinters, flinging shards of wood and dirt skyward like violent fountains. The ground trembled again and again as the barrage crept closer. Wasn't random shelling. This was preparation, standing. Near the entrance was First Lieutenant Garland Merle Connor, 25 years old, watching the forest dissolve under explosive force. He didn't look like a war hero. 5 feet 6 inches tall, barely 120 pounds, a tobacco farmer from rural Kentucky. He never finished high school. The nearest schoolhouse had been 15 miles from his family farm. Work came first. Education came second, if at all. War came later, and war did not care about size. By January 1945, Connor was no stranger to violence. For years of conflict had carved experience into him like weather into stone. He had taken part in 10 major campaigns for amphibious landings fighting across multiple continents. He had been wounded 7 separate times. 7.3 weeks earlier, he had still been in a hospital bed, recovering. 2 days ago, he had rejoined his battalion. Now he stood at the front again. His role wasn't even meant to be combat-focused. As an intelligence officer, Connor gathered information, tracked enemy movements, interrogated prisoners, updated maps. He was supposed to observe war, not stand in its path. Yet among the men of the 3rd Battalion, the 7th Infantry Regiment, he had earned a different reputation. When things went bad, Connor moved forward, not backward. For Silver Stars already testified to that. Pattern, Italianzio, France. Each medal marked a moment when survival had become secondary to responsibility. The battalion's position was fragile. They held a critical sector north of what Allied planners called the Colmar Pocket, the last major region of German control inside France. Hundreds of square miles of frozen woodland and farmland still remained under enemy grip west of the Rhine River. Previous assaults had cost thousands of lives. Progress had been slow, painfully slow. German forces here were cornered, and cornered armies often fought hardest for 18 straight days. The battalion had endured frontline conditions. Temperatures regularly dropped below zero. Snow concealed movement and muffled warning sounds. Night patrols probed their defenses without rest. Sleep came in frozen foxholes when it came at all. Artillery and snipers had already claimed dozens of casualties in just 2 weeks. Men were tired, cold, running thin on patience and warmth alike. Still, holding. But only just. At 7:15, the German barrage intensified. Shells began walking forward, adjusting, impact zones creeping closer, toward American positions with deliberate calculation. Then silence, a sudden vacuum of sound. No explosions, no cracking timber, no falling debris, just wind moving through broken branches. Experienced soldiers understood what that meant, and seconds later they heard it. A deep mechanical growl rolling through the forest, heavy engines, steel, tracks crushing ice and brush. Beneath unimaginable weight, a runner burst into the command post carrying confirmation. German infantry, hundreds strong, advancing through the woods, supported by armor. 6 Tiger tanks. Maps were studied, angles measured, distances calculated. The conclusion formed quickly and grimly. If those Tigers reached the American line, they would roll straight through the foxholes. No friendly armor stood ready to intercept. No tank destroyers available. No fallback position prepared. Only one realistic counter remained: artillery, but artillery required eyes, forward observation. And the observation post had already been destroyed during the barrage. Observers were dead or wounded. No one could see the enemy approach clearly from safety. Someone would have to go forward. Across open snow, under artillery threat, advancing tanks to become the eyes guiding 12 distant howitzers. It was a task few would volunteer for. Connor studied the terrain, measured the distance. Approximately 400 yards. He reached for a field telephone, picked up a spool of wire. And without ceremony, stepped into the snow. The moment Connor stepped outside the command post, the cold struck him like a wall. Wind cut across the open ground, dragging loose snow into shifting patterns that blurred distance and depth. The forest ahead looked shattered, branches broken, trunks split, earth gouged by artillery impacts. Somewhere beyond that ruined tree line, 6 Tiger tanks were advancing. He carried only 3 things: a field telephone, 400 yards of wire, and a decision already made. No speech, no announcement, no hesitation. He started running. The spool turned in his hand as wire uncoiled behind him, tracing a fragile lifeline back toward the artillery network miles away. Boots punched through frozen crust, each step heavy, deliberate. The distance looked deceptively short on a map: 400 yards in open snow. Under threat, it felt endless at first. Only wind and breath filled his ears. Then, as if triggered by his movement, German artillery resumed. The first shell struck far to his left. A deep, metallic shriek tore through the air before impact, the unmistakable sound of descending ordnance. Snow erupted skyward in a violent column, followed by the concussive thump rolling across the ground. Connor didn't slow. He couldn't afford to calculate trajectories or predict adjustments. Artillery observers were likely correcting fire already. Another impact closer. Then another, bracketing the space around him, narrowing distance with mechanical precision at roughly 100 yards forward. The barrage intensified. A shell detonated ahead, splintering a tree into flying shards. Wood fragments and frozen debris rained down as he pushed through. Lowering his head and continuing forward, another blast struck behind him. The shock wave slammed into his back like a physical shove. Air compressed in his lungs. Balance faltered, but he stayed upright. Wire continued to spool. Movement continued forward, halfway across the open ground. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. A trunk shattered directly along his path, splitting lengthwise and collapsing across the snow. Connor vaulted over it, boots scraping bark dusted with frost, never breaking stride. Metal fragments hissed into the snow nearby. Another impact, closer still, blasting dirt and ice upward. The pressure wave hammered his ears until sound blurred into a persistent ringing. Forward. When he reached the forward American foxholes, soldiers stared in disbelief. An intelligence officer running past them. The enemy. With a telephone. He didn't stop to explain, didn't pause to speak. He kept moving 30 yards beyond the line, searching terrain for even the smallest usable cover. And found it, a shallow ditch, barely 18 inches deep. Not protection, merely concealment, but enough. He dropped into position and uncranked the handset. Static hissed. Wire held intact. Then connection. A voice answered from miles away. Artillery command. Connor became their eyes. Raising himself just enough to see, he scanned the forest ahead. Movement, shapes resolving through branches and drifting snow. German infantry, approximately 200 yards out, advancing in disciplined formations, spacing maintained. Rifles prepared, officers guiding movement between trees. Behind them, armor for visible Tiger tanks, pushing through thinner timber, engines vibrating through the ground. Smaller trees bent or snapped beneath their mass as steel advanced slowly and deliberately. Rushing. Dominating. Connor relayed coordinates.com. Precise, measured. Target. Infantry concentration. Distance, 600 meters. Fire mission. He lowered himself and began counting seconds, stretched breath, condensed in rhythmic bursts. Then the sky answered. Artillery shells screamed overhead and detonated beyond enemy formations, impacts. Landing slightly long, Connor adjusted immediately. 100, corrective command transmitted. Without hesitation, enemy infantry continued forward, unaware how precisely they were now observed. Seconds later, the second salvo arrived, directly among them. Explosions shattered formation cohesion. Snow and earth erupted. Figures fell, scattered, or disappeared entirely within smoke and debris. Connor ordered sustained fire. Maximum rate. 12 guns responding, cycling again and again for several minutes. The forest became an impact zone. Repeated detonations tore into the same grid of terrain, preventing regrouping and forcing German units to scatter for cover. But armor continued advancing, unaffected by chaos around them, unstoppable momentum pressing forward. Connor shifted focus, coordinates updated artillery, redirected toward steel targets. This was never artillery's ideal purpose. Precision against moving armor, but disruption. Mattered shells landed around the tanks. Explosions rocked terrain tracks, churned through debris, still advancing. Then one impact struck. Differently, a shell detonated close enough to damage a track. Assembly. One, Tiger slow. Another. Blast landed behind a second vehicle, smoke rising from engine. Housing. Progress altered. Formation. Adjusting. And in that moment, tank commanders spotted the source. Guiding fire, a telephone wire. Ditch. One lone observer. The remaining armor shifted direction. Toward Connor, distance closing, steel, and intent. Converging, the tanks were coming directly toward him now. No confusion, no uncertainty. Their advance had shifted deliberate. Focused, steel noses angling toward the shallow ditch that hid. The man guiding artillery fire, Connor raised himself just enough to observe distance, roughly 150 yards. Through drifting smoke and shattered branches, he could see them clearly now. Massive silhouettes cutting forward through winter haze. The mechanical churn of tracks vibrated through the ground beneath his elbows. Turret commanders stood partially exposed, scanning for threats, scanning for him. He relayed another correction. Coordinates. Tightened artillery shells began landing closer, detonations punching into frozen soil around the armored wedge. One blast struck near enough to jar the lead vehicle sideways, fragments rattling across its exterior. Still, advancing Tiger armor had not earned its reputation through fragility. These machines were built to endure punishment. Connor knew artillery alone could not reliably destroy them, but delay, confusion, disruption, those mattered. Second gained meant survival chances rising for the battalion behind him. Then a tank fired. The 88mm gun discharged with a deep, violent concussion that flattened surrounding air. The shell struck somewhere behind Connor's position, obliterating an American foxhole. Snow, dirt, and debris erupted upward in a violent plume. He did not look back. He COULDN, single quotes to focus, remained forward. He adjusted fire, again closer. Another salvo struck among the vehicles. A track assembly shattered under impact, immobilizing one Tiger. Crew members scrambled within its hatchways, motion sharp and urgent. Another detonation struck rear plating of a second tank. Smoke vented from the engine. Compartment, momentum disrupted, but not. Halted. For operational Tigers continued advancing, and now they were closer. Connor recalculated distances 300 yards from American lines. Closing steadily, he shifted position slightly within the ditch, elbows grinding into frozen soil. Numbness creeping into fingers that gripped the handset. Infantry units were regrouping as well, using armored vehicles as mobile shields, preparing to resume forward pressure. If armor crossed the line, defensive collapse became likely. There would be no controlled fallback, only chaos. He made the decision quietly, without drama, without announcement. He gave new coordinates on his own position. The artillery officer on the other end paused, asked for confirmation. Standard protocol demanded it. Calling fire onto one's own location was not routine. It was an admission of proximity, of risk, of potential finality, Connor confirmed once, twice, twice, 3 times. He lowered himself into the ditch and braced. 40 seconds later, the first shells arrived. Detonations erupted just ahead of his position, shockwaves compressing air violently against his chest. The pressure change forced breath from his lungs as soil and snow cascaded downward. He remained in place, voice steady, adjusting. Again, dropped 20. The next impact came closer. Much closer, explosions rolled across terrain within. Dangerous proximity. Heat washed across exposed skin despite winter air. Metal fragments cut through space above him, embedding into frozen ground nearby. The tanks slowed armor crews unwilling to advance through sustained artillery. Saturation. Connor continued directing. Fire, walking impacts across advancing infantry, clusters denying them stable ground, movement halted. Regroup attempts shattered. Momentum stalled, time stretched, minutes layered into one another. The ditch became center point of converging, barrages, American shells falling near. German artillery now responding as well. Enemy observers had triangulated his location. Incoming rounds struck across overlapping grids of destruction. Earth convulsed, sound blurred, cold and heat intermingled. Still, Connor stayed. German infantry pushed forward. Again, 80 yards out, close enough to hear shouted commands, close enough to see figures maneuvering between shell craters. Connor shifted handset grip, left arm partially numb after debris impact, continuing corrections with his right. Artillery landed even closer. 60 yards, explosive. While denying advance, one officer leading assault disappeared within blast plume. Attack faltered again, but armor remained. 3 operational Tigers spreading out, adjusting. INTERVALs, adapting tactics. Machine guns opened up. Toward American lines beyond, Connor responded, with mixed fire requests, smoke rounds combined with high explosive, vision obscured, confusion layered onto chaos. One tank emerged blind through drifting smoke and struck debris, its forward optics shattered by blast shock. Another lost mobility entirely. Abandoned. Cold had begun to take hold fully now. Feet unresponsive, time spent exposed. Approaching an hour, then movement closer still. Soldiers approaching within yards of the ditch. A private from intelligence section arrived with additional wire reinforcement, spotting the proximity and relaying. Urgency. Connor adjusted fire again. Impacts landing within 12 yards. The blast physically lifted both men momentarily. The private wounded but refusing evacuation, they stayed. One final Tiger remained active, 40 yards from American foxholes, main gun firing at near point-blank range. Connor requested maximum concentration, all guns synchronized. 12 shells arriving nearly simultaneously. The ground convulsed under impact. When smoke cleared, the last Tiger stood crippled, vision destroyed, crew abandoning. Armor threat ended. Infantry resistance continued another hour under sustained fire direction. Gradually, movement ceased. Weapons fell silent. Engines quieted. The counterattack had failed. Connor remained in the ditch. 20 additional minutes, ensuring no renewed push. Only then did he rise, muscles stiffened by cold. Battlefield. Around him, scarred beyond recognition, he and the wounded private walked. Back across terrain cratered into a lunar landscape. Behind them, silence. Ahead, survival. The battlefield fell quiet. Not suddenly, but gradually. Explosions faded into distant echoes. Gunfire dissolved into isolated cracks. Then nothing, only wind, moving across shattered snowfields. Remained, Connor stood in the ditch for several moments after the last artillery correction had been sent. His body resisted movement. Muscles had stiffened from hours of exposure. Joints reluctant to respond, adrenaline drained away, leaving cold behind. The private beside him, wounded but conscious, steadied himself. Together they climbed from the shallow depression that had served as their world for hours. What stretched before them no longer resembled woodland. It looked lunar, cratered earth, splintered trees. Burning metal hulks of immobilized armor, discarded equipment scattered between impact scars. The air carried smoke, frost, and the fading scent of explosives. They walked back toward American lines, slow, deliberate steps, wire trailing behind them across churned terrain. Intelligence assessments later assembled a clearer picture. The German counterattack had been broken. Confirmed casualties left. On the field, dozens, dead dozens more. Wounded, total losses, estimated far higher, 6 Tiger tanks destroyed, abandoned, or rendered inoperable. The battalion line held no collapse, no breakthrough, just survival purchased through endurance, measured in minutes, meters, and artillery corrections. Connor did not celebrate. He did not recount the details in vivid storytelling afterward. He did not elevate himself within the narrative. For him, the event became another entry in a long sequence of wartime memory. One more moment of necessity fulfilled. Recognition came in official form. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, among the highest decorations available for valor. And then he went home. March 1945. War still raging elsewhere, but his part largely concluded. Returning to Kentucky did not transform him into a public figure. There were no lecture tours, no dramatic retellings, no effort to shape legacy. He married Pauline Wells, resumed life as a farmer, worked soil instead of maps. The medals he had earned, including 4 Silver Stars and the Distinguished Service Cross, were stored away in a simple cardboard box, not displayed, not discussed. For decades, 53 years passed. History moved forward. Memories aged. Stories risked fading. Recognition, however, sometimes arrives later than action. A fellow veteran, Richard Chilton, began efforts to revisit Connor's service record. Documentation surfaced, testimony gathered, historical review initiated. What followed was not quick. It became a 22-year process of advocacy, review boards, and appeals. Persistence, sustained by Connor's wife Pauline, determined that the full scale of his actions received proper acknowledgement. In 1998, Garland Merle Connor passed away. He never witnessed the conclusion of that effort. 2 decades later, in 2018, the final decision arrived. The United States formally awarded him the Medal of Honor, posthumous recognition of actions performed on a frozen morning more than 70 years earlier. From tobacco farmer to one of the most decorated soldiers of the Second World War. Not through physical stature, not through command of armies, but through presence of mind, resilience under fire, and willingness to endure risk others could not. History often remembers grand movements, divisions advancing, campaigns unfolding, borders shifting. Yet sometimes outcomes hinge on smaller frames. A shallow ditch, a telephone line across snow, a single observer guiding distant guns. Garland Merle Connor weighed 120 pounds. On January 24, 1945, he carried far more than that, and in doing so, he helped ensure others could carry on. If you loved this story and want more history that shocks, inspires, and motivates, subscribe to Rising Warfare. Like this video and explore the incredible tales we uncover. More amazing content is coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss it.